Hi, and welcome to today's Engaging for Missouri webinar. With each of these 30-minute webinars, we intend to share research-based insights that leaders like you can apply in your own work to benefit and strengthen the state's agriculture and food system, hospitality sector, and communities. Today, Dr. Bryon Wiegand and I will share highlights from our marketing opportunities for niche meat processors project and provide an introduction to an effort to train processing facility labor in our state. Before we begin, I want to share a few housekeeping items. First, we'll close today's presentation with a Q&A session. Those of you who connected today via your computer may submit your questions in the chat screen. If you joined today by phone, then you may email me your questions at roacham@missouri.edu. Second, all attendees are muted and may not start their video. Third, if you encounter any technical problems today, then please let us know by including a comment in the chat screen. And last, we will make a recording of today's presentation as well as today's presentation slides available. You can access those via an email from Zoom that you'll receive sometime tomorrow. You can also find an archive of all of our previous Engaging for Missouri webinars on our MU Division of Applied Social Sciences YouTube channel. So with that, we'll transition to the topic of today's webinar titled Highlights from the Marketing Opportunities for Missouri's Niche Meat and Poultry Processors Project. Presenting today are Dr. Bryon Wiegand, who serves as Director for the MU Division of Animal Sciences, and myself. I'm a Senior Research Associate in the MU Division of Applied Social Sciences. So to get started, I wanted to share some brief background about the project. The project received funding toward the first part of 2019 from the Missouri Agricultural and Small Business Development Authority. So we do appreciate MASBDA's financial support of the project. When we sort of laid out the roadmap for what we wanted to achieve with the project, we really wanted to develop a marketing-oriented study that would help processors think about ways that they could diversify their businesses, adopt new marketing or distribution models, or look for opportunities that would enable them to add capacity to their business. One of the first elements of our project was to conduct some survey research with Missouri meat processors. So in mid-August of 2019, we launched a survey and we closed that survey toward the first part of November of 2019. We worked with the Missouri Association of Meat Processors to recruit processors to participate in this research, and we had 28 individuals respond. So that was about a 20% response rate. You can see some of the highlights from the survey up on the screen. A majority of our respondents owned a meat slaughtering or processing facility, and about 2/3 of them had more than 20 years of business experience. Half of them ran USDA inspected facilities, and their operations tended to be very well diversified. About 7 in 10 of them sold at least 20 branded products to end users. So in terms of what we considered a branded product, we gave the example of if you sell a pork chop and a stuffed pork chop, then that would be 2 separate products. If you sold jerky and meat snack sticks, then those would be 2 separate products. In terms of how these businesses assigned responsibility for marketing communications and product development activities, individuals in the survey could respond that a series of people had responsibilities, but the most frequently cited individuals who had marketing communications responsibilities were the owner's family. And then the owner tended to be the most commonly cited person who had product development responsibilities for the business. A majority of our respondents also had a growth orientation. So of those with processing activities, about 90% of them had planned to increase their processing volume in the next 5 years. And then of those with slaughtering activities that were part of their business, again, about 90% of them had planned to increase their slaughtering volume in the next 5 years. This chart summarizes the types of animal species handled by our responding facilities. So you can see that the facilities very commonly slaughtered cattle, goats, hogs, and sheep. And then in terms of processing, the 3 most commonly processed species were cattle, deer, and hogs. One portion of the research sought to understand the types of business units that were included in these meat processing facilities. So we not only wanted to know the type of business units that the facilities included at present in their business, but we were also curious to know what types of business units maybe have been involved in the business at some point in its history, but weren't a present part of the business. And so you can see from the chart here that making products using your business's own recipes, marketing products with your own brand name, and operating a retail counter or store were very common business units, both presently and at some point in the history of the business. But there were two business units where we saw firms exiting. So those were catering service and custom processing service. So we dug a little further and asked why firms did exit these two business units. So for catering service, the two most commonly cited reasons related to profitability and a lack of labor. And for custom processing, the most commonly cited reason for exiting that business unit was related to regulatory provisions. To try to understand the distribution channels that these Missouri meat processors used for the products that they were creating, we asked them of the total volume of meat that their businesses handled for slaughtering or processing, what percentage was sold through a variety of distribution channels. So if you take a look at the pie chart here, these processing businesses do tend to use quite a lot of distribution channels when selling their products. But the three most predominant services or products, or rather distribution channels for services and products, were custom processing, your own retail counter or store, and then wholesale sales. So the last survey insight that we wanted to share was this question about what does your business need to become more effective at marketing? So the responses to this question were particularly important for us because we wanted to use them to shape the rest of the project, to make sure that we were developing project materials that really served a need among Missouri meat processors. So when we asked this question, we asked the processors to rank these needs according to the most important and the least important. So the smaller the rank, the more relative importance that item had. So the three top needs cited by these businesses were they wanted information about consumer preferences, they wanted to understand about how to enter new distribution channels, and they wanted to understand funding opportunities that were available to help offset their marketing costs. Other top needs cited were online marketing related trainings, information about how to create a marketing plan, and also information about how to use social media. So based on the insights that we collected from the survey, as well as the project plan that we had included in our funding proposal, we developed a series of project outputs. And the first of those is a written report that will be available later this summer, and we'll publish it on the Extension website. And in this report, we include a lot of secondary information about three topics, one being product diversification, where we're sharing trends about specific product categories. So processors could consider whether they may want to enter those product categories, or they may want to change the way they market products currently in those product categories. The second chapter takes a look at species diversification to understand what it takes to process multiple species in a single facility. And then the third chapter looks into attribute-based marketing. So things like local, grass-fed, and organic, we look into consumer preferences that are specific to those types of attributes. Additionally, in the written report, you'll find a summary of the primary research that we conducted for the project. The second type of project output was a meat business marketing and branding workshop that we hosted in March of 2020. It was a one-day workshop to precede the Missouri Association of Meat Processors annual convention. So we had about 40 to 45 attendees, and the content for the day focused on how-to marketing information. So everything from communication planning to marketing communications to distribution. We had folks from Mizzou present, and then as well as we had some speakers from industry. The video lessons produced for the project are instructional type videos that are accessible publicly on YouTube. You can access them from this bit.ly link that you see up on the screen. The purpose of the video lessons is to provide some more information that was specific to what processors wanted to hear. Additionally, we included a few other subjects that we thought could be important for processors. So you'll find video lessons on topics like business structure, business succession, communication planning, and social media. Those run about 15 to 30 minutes apiece. And so you can take a look at them on YouTube if you're interested. The last form of project output that we created have been a series of audio stories. So these are like feature stories or audio-based case studies where we interviewed 7 processors in Missouri and then told their stories in their own words in an audio-based format. So in these audio stories, processors had an opportunity to share about their experiences and their lessons learned. And really, we designed these to be a form of peer-to-peer learning so processors could learn from their colleagues. However, anyone who has an interest in Missouri processing businesses can have a listen. You can access them at the bit.ly link that you see up on the screen. That link directs to a YouTube playlist. Each of these stories is capped at 15 minutes. And so we kind of design them to where if you're answering emails at the beginning or ending of the day, then you can take a listen to one of these audio stories and learn about meat processors while you're wrapping up or beginning your day. So for the remainder of my time today, I want to highlight 5 key themes that we heard in these audio stories that I think are particularly relevant. And the first is that, as I suggested earlier from our survey results, a lot of these Missouri meat processing businesses are quite diversified in terms of the products that they offer, as well as the distribution channels that they use to sell their products and services. And at least on a couple of occasions, the interviewees who were participating in our audio stories mentioned how that diversification really served them well during the COVID-19 pandemic, because they were able to pivot to serve the markets that were available. So I think that's important not only for meat processors, but really all businesses to think about how they could become more resilient. That diversification was helpful for these meat processors. The second point relates to multi-generational businesses. So as I suggested earlier, a lot of these processing businesses are very family oriented, where the family is very involved in the business. And oftentimes these businesses pass from one generation to the next. And on a couple of occasions, some of our audio story participants mentioned how they were the next generation and they had an opportunity to go outside of the business and work somewhere else in the same industry, but a different firm, so they could pick up new perspectives and insights and ideas that they could bring back to the family business to strengthen that business. So I think that's an important takeaway, not only for meat processors, again, but any small business. So you can go outside, get some experience, and then bring that back to the business to help out your family operation. The next theme was that in a lot of cases, these meat processors don't necessarily have huge sales staffs or the capability to just kind of blanket the nation and go out and prospect new customers, but they have been able to grow. And one way they've been able to grow is that they can grow the business with their existing customers. So as their existing customers have new opportunities, they can tap into those and grow their book of business with those existing customers. So I think that that really speaks to the relationship building that takes place between meat processors and their customers. There's a lot of trust there, and they listen to their customers, and so that's been able to serve them well. Also regarding expanding, several of the processors who we spoke with had either recently completed expansions or they had planned expansions or were in the midst of expansions whenever we talked during our interviews. And one individual in particular, I think, very eloquently stated the kinds of decision-making processes that went into thinking about expansion. And he mentioned in particular that, yes, you do have to consider the capital investment that's required. What does it take to actually grow the footprint in terms of whether you're acquiring some new property or you're building a bigger facility. But he also mentioned that you have to think also about your labor that's going to be required to fill that space and to move product through that larger space, and what it takes from a managerial perspective to be able to manage new products and services and people. So as we think about how to support meat processors, and there's a lot of interest in that space right now, I think it benefits us to think about not only how we can provide some short-term assistance, but how we can provide some long-term assistance to make sure that those expanded businesses have a chance to be sustainable. And then the last thing that I wanted to highlight is that labor shortages were mentioned as a constraint by quite a few of these businesses that participated in the audio stories, but they did have some innovative solutions to address labor shortages. A couple of individuals mentioned how they invest in equipment as a way to make their operations more efficient. One individual mentioned hiring a search firm, so a firm that specializes in finding the right people for the right position, and that helped them attract good talent. And then another recommendation or idea that one business shared was that they offer opportunities for advancement. And so their people can see their jobs as more than just jobs, but careers, and they can grow with the business and then help the business grow as well. So with that, I want to toss it to Dr. Bryon Wiegand, who can share about a new effort in Missouri to help increase the processing facility labor pool.
Excellent. Thank you, Alice. I'm going to share my screen here and we'll move into part 2. we go. So this is a great segue, I think, into the conversation about the labor pool and labor shortages that we've seen in these processing plants. The reality is that even pre-COVID, this was one of the major themes that processors have encountered. Part of it's recruiting, part of it's retention. And so we're trying to find a way through a new program. And what I'm talking about today is a small piece of a workforce development program that's really gotten traction. And I think you'll see that it's a pretty unique partnership that we've created. So I'm going to take the angle of looking at the workforce training and development with an emphasis on justice-involved individuals. And that terminology is being used for those folks that may have been incarcerated through the Missouri Department of Corrections and quite frankly, outside of Missouri, but we're focusing on Missouri at the moment. So we're going to work our way through that. And then I'm hoping to have a fairly robust conversation about this if you have questions. So the rationale, which I think we've already established, is that worker recruitment and retention is a major issue for meat processing businesses. And it's really, if we kind of break that down, meat processing has a really significant set of hard skills, skilled labor components that are difficult to achieve compared to some other manufacturing industries. And I think part of that has to do with the fact that other manufacturing industries still have a pretty significant apprenticeship program associated with them. But as we look at meat processing, a lot of the more integrated companies that have the greatest market share do a lot of in-house training for their hard skills or their skilled laborers. And the small, very small, and even to some extent mid-sized processing plants don't have a ready pool of that skilled labor because there just isn't an infrastructure that creates that internship or other workforce training kind of opportunities. The other issue that we have a little bit is the expectation of what it's like to actually work in a meat processing plant. We have some environmental issues where it's cold or it's hot, and describing to someone that they should come into this industry, telling them what it's going to be like. Sometimes it's hard to get that expectation communicated without actually having the person in that facility and working. And in many cases, these very small processing plants rarely have time to train personnel because oftentimes they're in the midst of doing the job already, and there's some difficulty there. And then we do have a unique regulatory environment. We are, after all, producing food for human consumption, and working within that regulatory environment can be difficult for someone if they don't know what that expectation is with regard to sanitation and food safety and worker safety. So that's kind of the rationale for going down this road. So I want to present to you, this is one of the first groups that will hear of this new partnership that we're developing. This is born out of a partnership between the Missouri Department of Agriculture and the MU College of Agriculture, Food and Natural Resources through our Division of Animal Science. And we have really kind of two funding streams that have found their way to us. One of these is $3 million that came from the Federal CARES Act, and that is going to allow us to do something that we've never had an opportunity to do, and that is to capitalize new equipment through our facility here at the university. That's the Mizzou Meat Market, bringing in equipment that is equivalent to or technologically advanced to compare with what our processors have in the state. So with regard to outreach and extension, we would have an opportunity to troubleshoot much more easily because we can recreate the issues that they may be facing within our own pilot plant here at the university. And that helps us interface to a much greater degree with those processors. It also allows us the opportunity to host a lot more of the workforce training component, whether it be in a short course or more sustained traditional offerings here on our campus. The maybe more exciting piece of this, while bringing equipment into our facility is very important, I'm much more excited about the opportunity to take the training to the state of Missouri. And this has been something that's been a long time coming. And you'll hear more about this in the coming weeks and months about mobile training centers that we're building and creating. One of these is a further processed mobile unit that, for lack of a better word, or maybe something you can identify with, it's essentially a hot dog plant on wheels. We have an opportunity to teach further processing in that. It is a self-contained unit that I think will be very useful, and it will meet regulatory specifications and will be a nice training unit in that regard. The other unit that we're planning is actually a retail storefront, a mobile business, small business, where we can help train employees in the consumer facing or the customer facing aspect of the business, and everything from money handling to inventory management to marketing, these kinds of things. So those are two mobile training centers that we are in the process of creating, and we'll have those out in the state of Missouri in probably into 2022. It's good to have the opportunity to capitalize these programs, but we have to have people to help run them. And the good news is that our Kaffner Foundation has been very supportive in efforts, and we learned recently that they are going to help provide funding for a program director of our workforce development effort here. So that is also an incredible opportunity for us to move this forward. So let's look at this more pointedly. And we know that one possible pool of trained workers could be those justice-involved individuals that have possibly been incarcerated within the corrections facilities of the state of Missouri. And approximately 18,000 people annually are released from various programs with the Department of Corrections in the state of Missouri. And a lot of what we're focusing on is how do we provide some of those individuals opportunities to learn a very specific skill set that makes them very well tooled to enter the industry that has, quite frankly, very good compensation, benefits, and opportunities for advancement as those individuals reacclimate to the workforce. So this is part of a program that has been in the works for some time, something that we just really haven't had the opportunity to push off center until very recently. So the approach here is a three-pronged approach. It's the umbrella of training individuals really in three areas. And the first of these is a food/worker safety. There are a significant number of certification and training programs that, if a worker has, for example, HACCP certification, which is one of the food safety programs that we have in meat processing, that worker is sought after because they understand through their HACCP training, they much more fully understand the regulatory environment of making safe and wholesome food. So if we can provide that training for these individuals and that certification, then they're able to carry that sort of as a badge that allows them to be much more fully employable, and they have a greater value to that future processor. Obviously, we want to train people in meat processing as well. And this is more of the meat and potatoes of it, if you will, where we're teaching those aspects of sanitary and humane slaughter, further processing of carcasses, and then in further processing all the way out on into products that would end up in snack sticks and other products at the end user level. And then the third piece that I mentioned a little bit earlier with regard to one of those mobile units is retail business management and understanding how these they are retail stores, but they have some unique characteristics to them, as they have highly perishable products and they have products that have very high margins. And how do we interface with those customers ultimately to deliver that skill set? So we take this three-pronged approach in this particular program. So we've been engaged for some time with the Missouri Department of Corrections and their reentry programs. And the conversations have worked around where is the most logical place to engage? Should it be in our typical facilities that are minimum and medium security, both men's and women's? Are there other aspects of the Department of Corrections where there are programs to engage? And one of the opportunities that we are looking at for the fall of 2021 is a pilot in one of our women's community supervision centers, CSCs. These are essentially supervised training. If you don't have a familiarity, these programs are designed for individuals that have an opportunity to get some workforce, to get some other resources that allow them to, in fact, not be incarcerated. So it's essentially one step before a prison stay or an incarceration stay. So we have a pilot that we're going to work with in a CSC here in Central Missouri coming this fall. And we hope to be able to share more of that opportunity in the very near future. So that gives you a little bit of just a fingernail scratch of what we're working on. Again, the Justice Involved piece is part of a much larger effort that we're working on for the state of Missouri and with the state of Missouri. And we're really excited to be able to offer this. I think it's a good stepping off point. And I think that Alice is telling us about the previous work that the workforce training is very important in this regard. So at this point, I think we can probably have a conversation and take up some questions, Alice.
Absolutely, Bryon. Thank you so much for presenting about this new effort. We do have an attendee question that's asking, do these processors do custom work for producer-owned retail grocery and food service brands? So in our research, we didn't necessarily ask that in particular, so I don't have data to support it. I'm not 100% sure whether there is that much activity in producer-owned grocery and food service. Bryon, I don't know whether you can speak to that at all, if you have an example, but we don't have that data necessarily drilled down in our survey research.
I would say that there are some processors that are working directly in grocery. Some of it's in local grocery. It's probably a very small percentage. But we do have processors that are working with producers or growers for private labeled products that do find their way into the opportunity for shelf space. And if you draw back from that, certainly the much larger processors have the opportunity, the national brands, to be in the shelf to a much greater degree.
Great, thanks for that. We also have another question here about whether we plan to survey meat processors again post-COVID. We don't have any plans to do that at this point. I think that would be a great opportunity for us to update those survey findings. So we'll keep everyone posted if we do have an opportunity to survey processors again. Bryon, I wanted to toss a question to you about the training programs. How long is this training program that you've designed, and how will the program participants be assessed and their skills be assessed in the program?
So the training, the length of the training programs will vary depending on the nature of the participant, I suppose. In the much broader, so in the Justice Involved piece, some of these CSCs have a really finite window. So we won't be able to completely cover all of the aspects of the three prongs of the approach while they are within that program. So in some cases, we'll have somewhere between 6 and in some cases 20 weeks to cover as much as we can. And then, the thing to remember is a little bit of this becomes a revolving door because individuals matriculate to CSCs at different times. So the starts and stops are a little bit interesting to manage. So in terms of assessing, so we'll have some competency-based, it is very hands-on. So they will be probably not in the traditional educational sense, taking exams, but this will be competency-based where they will show us that they have passed through certain hurdles in the various three prongs of the approach, the educational approach here. And it's clearly going to vary depending on the nature of how long they are engaged with the program. What we're really hoping is that at some point, the individual is then connected, and we intend to have them connected to a processing company or a firm and allow that relationship to grow as well. So some of this can then be taken up in a more traditional short course opportunity where the processor has hired one of these individuals and then agrees to send them for continuing education with us. And that's how we're going to try to grow the program.
Excellent. Thank you for that. We have time for one more question, and this is a question from an attendee. Bryon, you mentioned a pilot plant at MU. What does that entail or look like? Is it upgrades to new facilities or a new build?
So our pilot plant, we are a USDA inspected facility. We're actually in two pieces. Our slaughter processing floor is a separate building from our further processing. This is not the opportunity for a new building. This is an opportunity to retool with existing, retool the equipment that we have with upgraded equipment. And so we're not doing construction. If some of you listening may know that we have a plan potentially in the future to build a facility. I think one of the benefits of this particular opportunity is that all of this equipment that we're bringing in is not built into the facility. It is transferable in the future as it is stainless steel, high quality, high end equipment that we can then move to a new facility should we have an opportunity to build that as well. But it really gives us a great opportunity to be at or above the level of technology adoption that our processors have so we can better serve their needs.
Excellent. Well, it's time to close today's webinar. Thank you, Bryon, so much for presenting with me today. And thank you to our audience for joining us. When you exit Zoom, you'll see a post-webinar survey will load in your browser. Please consider responding as we'll use the results to improve the webinar experience and also brainstorm future webinar topics. Again, you should receive a recorded copy of today's webinar via your email within about a day from now. Our next Engaging for Missouri webinar is scheduled for Wednesday, August 11th. Dr. Carrie Clark, who's an assistant research professor of rural sociology, will speak about modernizing agricultural mechanization in Africa to meet global food demand. Again, thanks for joining us, and I hope you have a great Wednesday.